As our day ends, we are shown a deadly new tactic aimed directly at agents on all-terrain vehicles.
This is a new one on me. It doesn't surprise us because this is the level of violence that we're seeing from these people.
Just 2 days before we arrived, a thick wire was found attached to a secondary fence on the U.S. side and fed through a hole in the primary fence on the Mexican side. If it was pulled taut at the right moment, an agent could be decapitated.
You've never experienced anything like this though before?
No, it's getting drastic now. It's going the way we're going. It's very difficult to spot it.
Right.
The only counter we can do is either ride the bike a little higher, or we're still going to take the blow at center mass, but at least we won't have the possibility of losing our head.
But this would be a nightmare.
Oh yes, definitely.
And what do you read from this? Is this a warning? Is this them trying out your defenses? What is this?
The way this was done, it wasn't a warning. That they were trying this out to see if they can get away with it. That's going after the vehicle and the rider. In this case here, they're going right after the neck of the rider. They're trying to separate him from his head.
As the Border Patrol updates and changes its tactics, those on the other side change right along with them.
Do you guys consider this an escalation?
This is one more use of deadly force. This is one more thing that they're bringing out of their toolbox. So let's see what comes next.
Higher stakes in the cat and mouse game on the border. For Nightline, Miguel Marquez on the U.S. Mexico frontier.
So I was watching this special on ABC yesterday on YouTube. It was about how the Border Patrol have to deal with the new tactics of illegal immigrants on the U.S. Mexico border. And one of these new tactics that the illegal immigrants are using is decapitation wire, basically metal wire that is strung across the United States border perimeter fence to the Mexican border perimeter fence. There's two fences in between in certain places along the border. Evidently there's a Mexico perimeter fence and a U.S. perimeter fence, and they'd go over from the Mexican side on the U.S. side, string this wire across, pull it taut, and hopefully what they hope to do is they hope to decapitate some of these Border Patrol agents, these U.S. Border Patrol agents that were driving in between the fences patrolling. And they had it about neck high so that when they drive by real fast, hopefully they'd decapitate one of them. Now this tactic, this so-called new tactic that the Mexicans are using against the U.S. Border Patrol agents is not anything new. The Allied Expeditionary Force in World War II had to deal with this same exact problem. Namely, the Germans would string across the roads that the advancing Allied soldiers would be going through. They know that the Allies would be going through, say, a road leading up to Paris or something, west of Paris. They string across these roads piano wire at about neck height. And basically these cars would come by, and these Jeeps would come by, and Jeeps don't have a lot of protection. All they have is a little window frame, window frame with a bunch of glass, and a lot of the time they drive with these window panes down, so they can see better, I guess, evidently. My father was a military policeman in Hokkaido in the Army, and he said a lot of the time they just drove with the windshield down so they could see better. Not all the time, but sometimes they drove with the windshield down. But even if they drove with the windshield up, because it's collapsible, I mean, there's not a lot of protection there. So if you hit a wire like that, it could blow your windows out or possibly, do some damage to your vehicle. But what the United States would do to counteract these kind of measures, what they would do, for example, in the hedgerows, to combat the hedgerows, when they first landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, they had to deal shortly thereafter, about a month thereafter, when they were trying to break out from the Normandy beachhead. they had to deal with these hedgerows, which were natural fortifications. Basically, they were these French farmers would make them to kind of seal off their property to keep their, I believe it was cattle and sheep or whatever, and their farm animals in, and then they also used it for kind of as a property barrier and I don't know if they plant stuff in there too. I don't know. I think that's what they used it for. Anyways, doesn't really matter that much what they used it for. The fact of the matter is that it was a natural defense that the Allies had to combat, and it's basically these Sherman tanks would roll up over these natural barriers, these hedgerows, and when they'd come up over these hedgerows, they would expose the most weakest point of the tank, so that the Germans could shoot Panzerfaust, Panzerschrecks, and stuff like that up into the underneath of the tank, or they could shoot tracked artillery or anything, tank guns or whatever, up into the underside of the Sherman tanks or whatever, the Allied tanks, and then blow them up that way. So what they devised, a lot of the U.S. engineers, I believe it was, devised was a ram, basically, a spiked ram for the front of the Sherman to plow through the hedgerows, so that they'd be able to plow through straight forward instead of going up over it and being vulnerable to attack from underneath. And they used this same principle of improvisation to combat these new tactics, to combat these piano wire that the Germans would string across the road to decapitate Allied soldiers, British soldiers, Canadian soldiers, American soldiers, and the like. What they would do is they would take a metal bar, reinforce it onto the front of the Humvee's bumper, string it up about, I don't know, maybe 6 feet or so, maybe 7 feet, and then they would bend it at the top. They would put a notch in it, a sharp notch in the middle of it, and I believe at the top corner of it. And then when the Humvees would, or rather the Jeeps would go down the road and they'd hit this piano wire, the wire would be cut by these basically they were anti-decapitation devices, is what I think what they called them for the Jeeps. They're anti-decapitation devices, so it wouldn't take the guy's head off when they're driving down the road or damage their vehicle if they had the windshield up. Either which way, somebody would get hurt, they'd lose their head, or their vehicle would get damaged. But with these anti-decapitation devices, they would basically follow the lines so that they wouldn't get decapitated. And I don't know why it's so hard for the Border Patrol to implement the same defensive technique, I guess you could say, anti-decapitation device on their four-wheelers. They basically said they have no way, in the interview with ABC, they said they have no way of combating this threat, this new tactic that they're having to encounter with these Mexicans trying to decapitate them when they're riding on their four-wheelers. And all I say is use the same technique that they used back in World War II. Take some of those, all it is like, I don't know, metal rebar, not metal rebar, but just a bunch of metal. Anybody that has any basic concept of how to weld anything, I mean, you could probably go to a high school. Basically, all you have to do is go to any high school tech ed class, and I bet you could find a bunch of high school kids that know how to make this contraption. It's very, very simple. I mean, just use your imagination, just reinforce the front of the four-wheeler with this device, this anti-decapitation device, and you don't have to worry about leaning forward. What the Border Patrol agents are doing, or they're just simply standing up basically on their four-wheeler, so that when they get hit by this wire, that it won't take their head off. It'll just hit them in the chest where they've got body armor on, and hope that it won't break their ribs or whatever. But that's pathetic. It's a pathetic countermeasure for this. All you have to do is take this anti-decapitation device, weld it onto the front of the four-wheeler, and you're set to jet, So hopefully if we've got some Border Patrol agents that watch YouTube and see this video, they can get insight onto how they can protect their Border Patrol agents. And I hope that somebody sees this from the Border Patrol agency, and hopefully I hope it saves some lives.